I've now run out of VYou footage once this video goes up, and so this is going to be the very last of my 10 short VYou videos on whatever topic. This one is focused on critical thinking. That's what the rest of the usable videos that I have that I could put into some sort of thematic arrangement have to do with. Some of these are from my students, some of these are from people who are involved with the VYou network. And stay tuned after this for some discussion about how I plan to continue doing these 10 short clips videos, because I kind of like the format, and I know some of my viewers like the format too. And I'm going to solicit input from viewers. I don't want them as comments on this video. I'm actually going to put together some way in which people can write to me and submit comments, either using my Facebook page or some other means. So, here are the last of the VYou videos. This will be the last of the low quality, older, hair down kind of videos. And I hope you enjoy them. Why did you have to learn all those fallacies? Well, just to pass my test and get out of my class, right? Isn't that the whole goal of everything in college? Just to get it done and get the piece of paper? Well, you know, ask yourself, why do we make you do the things that we do in college over and over again? Do you get it the first time, the second time? Do you get it without reinforcement? Would you actually learn all these things on your own? The fallacies have been studied and have been talked about for, some of them, you know, for only a few hundred years, some of them for over 2,000 years. And the reasons why are because there are certain bad forms of arguing and reasoning that keep on popping up over and over and over again. And people keep getting suckered by them. And smart people generally, I mean, smart people sometimes do get suckered, but smart people generally don't get suckered. And ignorant people, or people who are, you know, not paying attention to things, or people who have not developed their skills to the level that they should, or people who are stubborn, or people who are, you know, it's not one way or another foolish, they get suckered. And they get suckered precisely by these sorts of techniques. That's why we had all of those great examples that you can see not only in your textbook and not only in the problems that we looked at, but also in the video lectures that I prepared for you guys or carried out in classes. Some of you actually contributed some really good examples to me too. But you see this happen over and over again. That why are we so concerned with these fallacies? Because you are going to run into them over and over again in your life, and you are going to have to address them. Exactly 542. No, actually, that's a joke. That's a good question, because if you look in different textbooks for critical thinking or different source books, they have different numbers of fallacies, and they sometimes use different terminology. There are certain basic ones that keep coming up, like, for example, the ad hominem fallacy, but you notice our textbook actually broke that down into several sub-fallacies, and it also distinguished the genetic fallacy. And I'll tell you right off the bat, the way our textbook distinguished the genetic fallacy is not precisely the way that another one that I've used before in the past does it as well. So you might say, well, you know, that doesn't sound very good. You know, these critical thinkers who are putting together these textbooks can't actually agree on how many fallacies there are and what sort they are, and there should be some consistency between them. It's really just a matter of how they decide to divide them up. Because you could take the same fallacy, and if you look at it very closely, you might actually break into two different fallacies. There's kind of a mirror image here. Two different fallacies, which then you could talk about at greater length. And there are some things that perhaps ought not be considered fallacies per se. as much as mistaken positions, because they're not really so much arguments. And our textbook had a few of those, you know. So there really is no actual numerical answer for you. How many fallacies are there? What's the exact number? But we can distinguish different families of them. Does that help? So this is another question from one of my critical thinking students. What is the difference between the fallacies of composition and division? Well, what do they have in common first? They're both fallacies. It means they're bad arguments. That means they also have a certain type to them, a certain structure, and that's why we give them particular names. What do these two fallacies have in common? Well, they both have to do with wholes and parts, or members and groups. And you can go from the parts to the whole, or you can go from the whole to the parts. And in both of them, you're attributing to one a property or a characteristic that you don't have good grounds for thinking that it does have. So if you're going from the parts to the whole, that's composition. If you're saying that because the parts have a certain property, the whole therefore must have it, when you don't have good grounds to think so, you're committing the fallacy of composition. If you're going the other way, and you're saying because the whole has a certain characteristic, the parts must have it, when you don't have good grounds for thinking so, then you're committing the fallacy of division. So just to give you some examples, if you say we put all the best players together onto a team, therefore that team is going to be the best team, you don't actually have good grounds to think so, because teamwork and being able to work with each other, all of that is required for the whole that the team is. So you'd be committing the fallacy of composition. If you say, well, the Green Bay Packers are all from the Green Bay Packers as a team is from Green Bay, therefore all the players are from Green Bay, that's a certain characteristic you're attributing to them. Not the case. That's the fallacy of division. So this is a question from one of my critical thinking students, and she is asking how much does downplay, and by that what she means is one of the rhetorical techniques or tropes, as they're sometimes called in other areas. How does that affect important decisions? Well, what we mean by downplayers there, what our textbook is talking about, are ways in which we can, without entirely discrediting a person, sort of de-emphasize their achievements or their capabilities or their relevance or their credibility. For example, the book has a great one where somebody's saying, yes, I have a yellow belt in this martial art, and my sister, she's a mirror green belt. Well, that mirror, I mean, if you know about martial arts, yellow belt is usually the first one after white belt, and then you work your way up, and green belt is higher. That mirror gives the impression that she has lesser capabilities or capacities or credibility. Do these affect important decisions? Yes, in a lot of different areas. In politics, which is very important, in the marketplace, in our economic decisions. We use these in personal relationships, in our arguments with spouses, boyfriends, girlfriends, friends, family members, all these sorts of things. There's a tendency to use rhetorical figures, sometimes knowingly, sometimes unconsciously. Where else? The workplace. Yeah, the workplace is very important. Also, even in scholarship, we may dismiss each other because we think that somebody else's research is not quite as important. And if you're skilled with rhetoric, you can do this quite easily using these types of words. So it is very important. Now that's a good question coming from one of my critical thinking students. Mr. Sims, who's actually asked two really good questions. Is an opinion always considered to be biased? Well, if it's somebody else's, of course, but if it's mine, no. No, that's a joke. No, opinions aren't always biased. If you have some good grounds for why you're holding the opinion, it's probably not coming from bias. Of course, your grounds themselves could be biased. It all depends on what reason you have for holding that opinion. And sometimes you may not have any reason. Sometimes, here's one kind of bias, right? Some people are opinionated. They're stubborn. They're in love with having their own opinions. Well, that's always going to be biased, right? But no, not all opinions are biased. So, what is a bad inductive argument? This is coming from one of my critical thinking students, and I'm not going to give her any trouble about not knowing the answer to this after the entire class, because I'm guessing that 3/4 of the class probably doesn't quite remember all of the ins and outs of this. Let's start with what is an inductive argument. So inductive arguments are those which have to do with probability, not with necessity, or likelihood, and you can make them stronger, you can make them weaker, you can add things to them. They admit of some exceptions. They're more like a dimmer switch than they are an off-on switch, in that you can make them stronger, weaker by adding or taking things away. What makes an inductive argument good or bad? Well, a good inductive argument has to have goodness in terms of its structure, how it's put together, and in terms of the starting points or the premises actually being true. So there's two ways in which it could be bad. You could have the structure not being set up well. For instance, when you do hasty generalization, right? You're doing an enumerative induction, and you are generalizing from too few cases. That's poor structure. That's poorly set up. It could be that your premises are actually false. For instance, if I tell you that your spouse came home last night while you were away, and he had lipstick on his collar, reeked of perfume, had somebody's phone number tucked in this pocket and a pair of panties in the other, you could reasonably infer that there's some cheating going on, right? However, well, and that would be, as far as form goes, that would be okay. What if I'm lying? What if the information's no good? Well, then that would be a bad inductive argument, right? Okay, another question from one of my critical thinking students. This needs some context for those who aren't in the class to know precisely what's being asked about. Target population is when you're making an enumerative induction, when you're making some sort of inference about a large group that you haven't actually observed, and you don't necessarily have data on. When you're making an inference about that large group, that's the target population. The sample is the part of the group that you're actually able to look at, the part you observe. And when you make an inference, going from the sample to the target population, or another way of thinking about it is going from the more specific to the more general, what you're doing is you're saying that because we know something about this small part of the group, we know something about the group as a whole. So when we do opinion polls, for example, and we poll 1,000 people or 10,000 people about their likelihood to vote for a candidate, we're only observing that portion, right? That is the sample. And the target is the whole set of possible voters who we don't observe. We don't actually know until they show up on election day which way they're going to go. And actually, sometimes they'll even lie when they come out of the booth. So the exit polls are sometimes not even correct. Can the target, so all that background information is helpful. Can the target population and the sample group be the same? No. But the sample group is part of the target group, isn't it? Because you're taking a portion of the target group, the target population, and you're sampling it. That's why we call it the sample. And then you're generalizing about the large group. So they can't be exactly the same, but they do overlap to some extent, right? Because the sample group is part of the target population. Is there a big difference between hasty generalization and stereotypes? So hasty generalization is a fallacy when you carry out a inductive operation in reasoning, and you do it on the basis of too few examples, too few for the sort of thing that you're investigating. So for example, you don't need to dissect an awful lot of pigs to know that they have livers, because physical things tend to be pretty similar. But if you want to know something about psychological traits of human beings and associate them, say, with ethnicities, or with work groups, or with religions, you actually have to look at a lot of people. You can't just go by the first 1 or 2 or even 10 that you come across. Hasty generalization fits into the larger phenomenon of stereotyping, but not all hasty generalizations are about stereotypes, and not all stereotyping is a matter of hasty generalization. Sometimes, in the formation of stereotypes, what's going on is you carry out a hasty generalization. You meet one French person, they're rude. You meet another French person, they're rude. You meet a third French person, they're rude, and you conclude that all French people are rude. And that would be a hasty generalization. That would also be a stereotype, right? Now, what if instead you were told by people that you know, or by movies, or by books, that French people are rude, and now you meet a French person and you say, that person's going to be rude because they're French. Well, you're not doing a hasty generalization then. What you're doing is something actually much more like a deductive process of reasoning. And I think that this is actually a really good question, and I am going to discuss this specifically in a Dr. Sadler Chalk and Talk, so thanks for the question. So this is the hardest critical thinking question that I've been asked so far. What is a good website to go to when judging someone like a news reporter's credibility? And it's the hardest because there is no one single website that you would need to go to. For news stories or facts or things like that, there are some watchdog sites. Factcheck.org would be an example of one. You see certain stories or certain statistics or facts being bandied about, and they actually do the research to see whether those are true. But sometimes you have to wait a while for them to actually do the research, and you don't know if they're covering everything, too. That's a problem with that. But does that get to an individual reporter or an opinion former? Not exactly. So what could you do? Well, you could start by Googling them, their full name, along with keywords like bias, commitments, opinions, arguments, relationships. See what sort of things come up, and if some of the things that are red flags start to come up, you find out that they are deeply committed to a particular political ideology, well, that's probably a bad sign. But there is no one single rule of thumb for this. So you've actually asked a question that I'm kind of stumped by. So. Well, I have to say I'm not a big fan of conspiracy theories in general, because they do tend to have the same sort of structure, just inserting different content, and there's usually some fallacies going on in it. One of the most prominent is, well, it could be this way, and you haven't proven that it's not this way, so therefore it is this way. Or it could be this way, and we don't have all the evidence for that, but if we did have the evidence for it, somebody would want to keep us from having that evidence or showing that evidence, so therefore it is this way. And those are essentially different formations of the fallacy that we call appeal to ignorance or argument from ignorance. I mean, they can be more sophisticated than that, and there are some conspiracies that actually do come to light, but the burden of proof is on the conspiracy theorists to really make their case, and they have to do it in part by showing that the standard story is in fact wrong, and I don't see the ones for 9/11 actually successfully doing that. It seems clear to me that we are in a conflict, and not just us, but a lot of others as well, with something that I would like to call totalitarian Islam rather than Islamofascism or anything like that. Some people call it radical Islam. Since I do a lot of work in fascist studies and studies of totalitarianism, I prefer the term totalitarian Islam. It seems clear to me that one group within that range, that spectrum, did in fact set up the coordinated plan and hit the towers and the Pentagon, and I don't have any problem believing that.
So I've given it a good bit of thought and reflection, and I've decided that the best way to solicit new comments and questions, which then I can assemble into more of these 10 shorts with higher quality production, of course, would be for me to create a YouTube video specifically about that, as sort of like a forum where people can post comments using the YouTube Google Plus comment interface. And then I will look at them, and those that I think are worth putting together into new videos, I will do from there. So don't put comments for new ideas on this video. What you want to do is put it on the video that I'm going to be linking to with an annotation here.